Welcome to Ethics and Changemaking, aligning technology with the greater good. My name is Mandy Bratton. I'm one of the Ashoka U change leaders here at the University of California, San Diego, where I direct our new Center for Global Sustainable Development. The center includes programs and organizations that help students develop and apply change-making skills to wicked problems. In a moment, I am going to introduce you to at least one of my colleagues, and then they'll introduce you to each other. But I wanted to give you an overview of the session right here at the beginning. So we have a video case study for you. It's quite brief, but we hope it illustrates one of the ways in which ethical issues are in some ways unavoidable in change making. It's very difficult, I think, for change makers to mobilize others to create positive social change without wrestling with ethical issues where they have to balance individual rights on the one hand with the common good on the other. So how do we educate students to recognize those ethical challenges and also to have the courage to face and address them? So in this session, we're going to explore those and related questions. After we view the video with Beta's help, hopefully we are going to break into small breakout rooms, and there will be a panelist in each of the rooms who will guide you through a discussion based on the case study and based on how you approach ethics in changemaker education on your own campuses. Then we're going to reconnect in the larger group where the panelists can report back what you talked about in your small groups, and we can continue the conversation as time permits. So with that, Vicki, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Mandy. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. My name is Vicki Aboud, and I'm currently faculty at the University of Windsor. So that's in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, right near the US border with Detroit, Michigan. And so some of the work that I do currently is teach international graduate level students technical communications. And so most of these students are in either computer science or in various engineering disciplines. And what I've been trying to do with them is to support their understanding of how tech and ethics need to be sort of hand in hand. That one is necessary for the other, so that they can actually go forward as professionals who are recognizing the value of social impact, social innovation through their particular disciplines. One of the ways we've been doing that is focusing on the UN Sustainable Development Goals and having them work through projects related to that. So that's sort of in a nutshell. So I will then pass it over to Camille.
Hello. Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending this session. I am Camille George, the Associate Dean of Engineering at the University of St. Thomas, and I'm very sad that you are not able to visit our campus today. Engineers are asked to create new technologies, and with creation comes responsibility. Engineers need to be educated to question their creation's impact, and above all, to obtain the skill set that gives them confidence in challenging entrenched ways of doing things, to seek the opinions of all stakeholders, and try to anticipate unintended consequences. About 15 years ago, I helped introduce a senior level bridge course that was co-taught by an engineer and a theologian. We created a list of topics and case studies to introduce engineering students to ethical dilemmas and to emphasize socially responsible engineering. As the Associate Dean, I promote the use of ethical case studies in our core engineering courses. We cannot educate change-maker engineers unless they practice ethical thinking, persuasion, and empathy. During my own engineering education, matters related to the social domain were rarely discussed. In fact, we were told to focus on the technical specifications, and it was not the role of the engineer to question employers' decisions. In this respect, I was completely unprepared when I accepted my first job as an engineer in 1990. I was hired into the Patriot missile launcher team the week of the first Gulf War. I had difficulty processing my job. It was no longer abstract, but real. Patriot missiles were the most used offensive weapon in that war. When I found out that the missiles were measuring, the missiles with measurable amounts of radioactivity were left as rubbish on the battlefield, and I saw photographs of children playing on this radioactive rubbish, I seriously began to question why such issues had never been discussed in my education. And I'm very glad that these topics are gaining momentum. And now I'd like to transition and introduce Dr. Paul Heidebrecht, the director of the Kindred Credit Union Center for Peace Advancement at the University of Waterloo. Thank you.
Thanks, Camille, and hello to everybody. It's great to be a part of this session and this exchange, even if we can't be meeting in person. As Camille mentioned, I'm the director of a peace center housed at Conrad-Grebel University College and the University of Waterloo. And I'm drawn to this session and to this topic for a number of reasons. My teaching, research, and administration work are focused on the intersection of peace building, social innovation, and technology. I hold an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering and worked for several years as an engineer before eventually going on to get a PhD in theological ethics, and found my way into my current role several years ago. Last year, we launched a new Peace Tech Living Learning community in our residence program at the University of Waterloo, an opportunity for students in any discipline to be coming together and reflecting critically on technology and its impact, and reflecting on ways they could apply their creative skills to marshaling technology for social good. That experiment grew out of several years of teaching academic courses in the intersection of peace building and technology to engineering students and to computer science students. It also grew out of extracurricular opportunities that we've been facilitating in the area of social innovation and entrepreneurship on our campus, coaching student teams in pitch competitions, and we're also drawing on a number of other strengths in our center in trying to cultivate and nurture the opportunities for students to engage with each other in this area. We've been supporting several Peace Tech Ventures startups in our incubator program for the last number of years. We're drawing on public policy expertise of NGOs based in our center who are doing advocacy around emerging technologies and warfare. And we're tapping into the growing interest in tech for good in our region's dynamic innovation ecosystem. So there are all kinds of reasons why I'm just really eager to be connecting with my fellow panelists and with all of you on the agenda of this session today. And I'll now turn it over to, last but certainly not least, Kristen Nixon.
Thank you. So hi, everyone. It's awesome to be here virtually. So I'm a chemical engineering major in my senior year at Johns Hopkins. Luckily, I found social entrepreneurship my freshman year and fell in love, and eventually found my way to Ashoka as an intern the last 2 summers, the most recent of which was with Ashoka U. I'm involved with change-making efforts at my university around integrating ethics and social innovation into the engineering curriculum, in addition to student mental health and well-being on campus. So as an undergraduate, I don't have a whole lot more to share in terms of experience, so I'm going to use this time to share my story, as it nicely sets up the fact that students really do want to see more ethics and social impacts in STEM education, and it also highlights the importance of this work. So by the end of my junior year in engineering, I thought I wanted nothing to do with the field after graduation. I was set on a career with social impact, and all of the math I was learning in my engineering courses was painfully dry and seemed completely divorced from the issues that I cared about. Luckily, I landed upon an opportunity with the Ashoka U to research the intersection of tech and change-making, and I discovered that engineering and other STEM fields have magnificent social impact. I just hadn't seen it yet in my curriculum. Even better, there's a lovely community of people within STEM working to use tech as a powerful force for good. So here I am, fascinated by the interplay between tech and society and social impact, and now set on launching a career in tech and change-making, because there are serious problems here, but also so much potential to use tech as an unprecedented tool for advancing equality and empowerment. So that's the story of how this session came to be, thanks to Ashoka U, and hopefully a demonstration of how ethics and tech education can deeply impact students' lives. I would love to connect with anyone who's interested in any of these things, especially if you know of job opportunities, because COVID has been pretty brutal to my job search. Okay, so now I'm going to transition us into our next activity. So we're going to watch our stimulus video called Models for Platform Governance. This is going to highlight some of the opportunities and harms of technology, specifically social media. And while this video is taking a regulatory approach to addressing these issues, we encourage you to consider the ways all stakeholders can work on addressing these problems, from tech designers, company leadership, professors of these future stakeholders, and even users of this tech. After the video, we'll move into breakout rooms for discussions.
Okay, here we go. I hope. Is it working?
The debate about the role of digital technology in our society has gone through a remarkable transformation. Following 2 decades of techno-optimism, we are now in the midst of a techlash. The 2016 US presidential election was the catalyst for this turn. Foreign actors who manipulated technology played a significant role in the election of Donald Trump. But the root cause of the techlash runs far deeper. A hands-off approach to technology regulation left companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon to serve billions of users and eventually perform core functions of our society. And the costs are increasingly clear. Platforms are creating negative costs to our social fabric, our economy, and our democracy. We've arrived at a time when these platforms simply need to be governed, and the approach must be global.
When we talk about platform governance, we're talking about what are the groups of people that need to come together in order to manage this large technological infrastructure that we're calling platforms. And platforms usually are referring to a place like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And the governance part is really about, well, how do we manage bad uses of platform technologies?
It's really about creating another way of understanding exactly the role that private platforms have and the outsized role that they have from other kinds of companies and other types of corporations that we've had before, just in terms of how they're affecting people's day-to-day lives.
It's these companies that have now become the major means by which we get political information, we do social interactions with each other, and our economies are being driven more and more by a digital environment.
For the longest time, we have heralded platforms, especially Facebook and Twitter, as liberatory technologies that are going to bring about massive democratizing social change throughout the globe. And we've seen numerous movements, from the Occupy movement and the Arab Spring, as well as Black Lives Matter, all using digital technologies to mobilize groups for positive social change. However, the problems related to having a lack of agreements around how platforms are to be used really touches ground in Charlottesville. Because when the Unite the Right rally was being planned, it was using all those same technologies and all those same techniques, the torchlight march and the coordinated outfits, and all of that planning was done on open forums, on platforms. And so we have to start to reckon with, well, what are these platforms doing to society? What are they allowing? And how do we strike a balance between the good uses of these infrastructures and the evil ones?
So what we're seeing happen in the digital environment without a unified governance structure, a regulatory body, is we have companies merging together. We have companies creating partnerships. We have new relationships developing through contract with no public oversight mechanism. And so we have a few winners in the digital marketplace who seem to be dominating across the economy, and in that way also controlling the way in which we communicate.
These platforms have become very, very common, And so now you're seeing that if you're going to have regulation, and regulation is what you decide is better for these companies, you're going to need to have to work with governments to have them work together and coordinate a way to either approach these companies so that they implement more ideal regulation regimes, or they decide to regulate the companies from the outside.
We need better agreements now about how we share information, especially when it comes to sharing information that is hate speech, harassment, or incitement to violence. And those kinds of information, while in the US are nominally protected by free speech laws, it is not the case globally. And these platforms are global. And so we are sort of at the tipping point of needing a global governance strategy, whether it comes from the corporations themselves or from other governments, to mitigate against these harms.
At the end of World War II, the global community understood that a new framework was needed to bring stability to financial markets and to prevent future conflicts. Today, a new set of rules is warranted. Rules to regulate data, competition, and content, the intangible assets that our democracies and the global economy rely on. Deciding what these new rules look like and how we achieve them will require global coordination. To begin to address this, CG is convening this.
Okay, so that is our case study. And Beta, I think at this point we are, I hope we're ready to break into small groups. Good. So who wants to report back?
I will start. So we talked about the ethical issues in the film first. And one of the things that was very interesting was the idea of American-dominated platforms. And one of the participants was not American and saying that they don't feel these platforms are well regulated or that they're globally used, but American owned. And there was a feeling that this monopolization of the technology space was dangerous. And in the second part of our discussion, we talked about how we incorporate change-making education at our institutions. And we talked a little bit about how in one case it's introduced in almost every class and it's talked about a lot. And in the other case was the Kern Family Foundation, Keen, and they have their own platform. So it's really interesting that they have a platform that they themselves have to manage. So it was quite timely with the film, and how they intended this for faculty sharing and didn't realize the unintended consequences when students began have access and they had to manually handle that. And the final issue that I'd like to, the final point I'd like to make is that we found that when the Keen Foundation asked their members what was the most challenging topic in engineering education, the answer was ethics. And this was a very large thread and a very large conversation in that community. So thank you.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. If we have time, maybe we can circle back and hear more about this work with the King Foundation. But let's hear from another group. And just go ahead and take yourself off mute and start.
I can
start talking because I can't see all of you at once.
Okay. Oh, this is Vicki.
Vicki.
Yes. So our conversation I thought was really interesting. And again, Samantha, I'm sorry that you got cut off. I think what was really interesting is we ended up going into sort of this very sort of micro human level, right? Thinking about the ethics along those lines. And so some of the thoughts, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Vicki.
You can?
Yeah.
Okay. So some of the thoughts that popped up were questioning, who are the folks who will be impacted by these governance decisions, right? If we're starting to talk about whether it's a platform situation or we're talking about change making in an institution or service learning in a community, it's, in what way are we actually going into governance or change making or a community, and actually coming in with this sort of savior mentality versus actually engaging with the community, you know, connecting in some kind of relationship with them and making sure that there's sort of this mutual, I guess, mutual agreement in some way. Agreement may sound too formal, but this recognition of the human level of the ethics, right? It's not just us going in and creating a dichotomy of us versus them in this like system-wide situation. It's really about who are these people? Who are we? Who am I to do this? How do we actually engage intentionally and purposefully and respectfully and honestly in all of these other very human capacities that sadly don't always come to the forefront. So it was pretty interesting to come into the more human level of it. And so for our group, that seemed to be one of the most important parts.
Yeah, that's so primary. So thank you for that. You know, the whole idea that, you know, the change maker isn't necessarily a hero parachuting in, but that, you know, there needs to be mutuality in relationships and solutions need to be co-created. So thank you for that. One of our other panelists.
I can jump in, and I won't do justice to the conversation I had, but I'll start by saying, Camille, there were a couple of St. Thomas students in my group, and they're clearly benefiting from a robust liberal arts education in which they're placing technology in service to the common good. So well done. And a good model. Lots of interesting insights from that. And maybe, I don't know, again, I can't summarize all of the reactions to the video and discussion, but the one thing I would say is it was interesting just to hear the rationale from everybody as to why they chose this session and the extent to which, whether, again, whether it's an engineering student or a business student or you know, someone working in the higher ed context, extent to which questions around technology are up in the foreground right now for us. And I think there's an eagerness to be seeing some examples of how technology is being used for positive change, interest in aligning technology with a positive, larger vision, and a critical lens about how do we attune ourselves to the ways in which technology is shaping society and our own understandings and assumptions. And so again, just kind of underscored, I think, the thirst and for conversations in this area, that obviously a session like this can only just scratch the surface. But glad that once again, Ashoka's found a way of including this agenda into the exchange.
Thanks, Paul. And while you were all in your small groups, Beta and I were having that very conversation about how do we do more of this at future exchanges, because this really seems to be, particularly with COVID, you know, just a really vitally important topic. I can't see everybody. Maybe Beta, you can. I don't know. Is Kristen still on?
Yep, I'm right here. I can jump in.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. So in my group, we were all feeling pretty overwhelmed by the scope and depth of all the problems that were mentioned in the video. But we all agreed that it's really important to have these conversations, even though they're pretty uncomfortable and there's no easy answers in sight. In terms of the ethical issues, we had a pretty interesting conversation on how free speech can mean amplifying hate in some cases, but it also can mean empowering people whose voices are historically not very well heard. So that's a very difficult line to walk in terms of designing a platform. Like, how do we design to maximize the good uses and minimize things like hate speech? We also had half of our group came from a sociology background, and we were talking about how there's this awesome interplay between sociology and engineering and other STEM fields, because the idea that the technical can be divorced from the social just really isn't true when you look at it with a more critical eye. All these technical decisions really do have social impacts. And in terms of how we integrate this stuff into classrooms, we were talking about the importance of having discussions so students are aware that there are social dimensions to technical issues, and aware of the complexity and all the types of issues that are out there. Some of us had full courses devoted to ethics. but we noted that it would be nice to see more real direct experience with ethical issues rather than just kind of seeing on a PowerPoint slide, this is an ethical issue that's in the news, because sometimes people feel like that happens sometimes, but it probably won't happen to me. But actually, some ethical dilemma will probably present itself to all of us at some point in our careers. And we also talked about how it can be really useful to talk through case studies that illustrate how technical decisions can be deeply intertwined with social implications.
Great, thanks, Kristen. I think we have sort of, I'm thinking about Camille's initial remarks and the kind of context stripping that she was encouraged to do as an engineer, that the technical issues had nothing to do with the ethical issues. And then you're talking about the role that social science has played to say that these are not necessarily things that you can separate out. So we have some time for full group discussion, which I'm delighted. We didn't plan for this, but this is great. And so anybody can jump in. And one of the things that I'm curious about as someone who teaches ethics is, and this is going off something Kristen said about the ethical issue on the slide. Do we teach about specific ethical issues, and do you teach about a process of approaching issues that might have an ethical component or ethical dilemmas?
I'd just like to comment to that, because I think one of the things that I've had the privilege of being part of is having a group together with a facilitator. And this was a facilitator who works with aspirational ethics with international professional groups. Mm-hmm. And just watching the ethics come together amongst the students and the people that the students were working with in terms of their projects. And to me, that's an essential piece of this. I mean, it needs to be guided, but it takes it out of the book learning. And these are the 4 principles you must adhere to. And it makes people interact in a way that forces them to look at their role in ethics in the future. And it was a brilliant process, and it's one of the things that I'm including in the book that I'm doing right now.
Wonderful. Nancy, you might want to include your contact information in the chat in case somebody wants to follow up with you about this.
Sure.
And then we have a general question from Keely. It says, as a non-STEM major, so marketing and Spanish, how do you think that other disciplines can or should contribute to the discussion of ethics and technology?
I was just typing a response. While the group I work with is really mostly engineering faculty, I am aware of at least one professor who switched the literature that she used. She teaches a lot of engineering students, so instead of teaching classical literature, she switched to Frankenstein and she switched to iRobot, and so she focused the books on technology literature and stories about what could go wrong if you take too much power and do too much without considering the consequences. So that's an English class.
Wow.
Focusing on ethics and technology to prepare engineers.
Yeah. Other ideas for this?
So hi, I'm Holly, and I was the sociologist in the group. I was saying I'm a medical sociologist by training, and so my field cuts way over into STEM, but I seem to be spending all my time with engineers as of late, which I love the engineers, and I actually find that we have a lot in common. And when I head over to engineering, even when it's not necessarily a part of the curriculum, I get huge crowds of students who have this just desire to talk about, social implications of anything and everything. And that to me has just been really heartwarming. for me, mainly with the engineers, I talk about the social implications of housing. I have a little bit of expertise in poverty housing, and so that's where I land with the engineers most of the time. And so we talk about those ethical issues about building houses and housing, which is a very interesting thing for, I talk to a lot of civils, obviously, because we're talking about structures. And so that's been fun, but it's very similar to the crossover in the STEM field when I go teach doctors or doctors in training, and trying to get them to think broader about the societal implications of medicine.
Great, thanks. Sorry, I'm multitasking because I'm responding to a chat.
Sure.
And I would also like to say that engineering faculty and engineers in general really need to reach out to other disciplines and other ways of thinking to discuss the myth of progress. Okay, so there's this idea that engineers often have that, oh, it's always better. Our inventions, our things will always make things better. And we need to somehow have more discussions that are cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, to make a lot of technology creators to step back and to think through what these impacts would be, and to question the myth.
Thank you, Camille. Samantha, I think you wanted to jump in here as well.
Yeah. Oops. Oh, okay. I'm back. So at my center, we provide some tools for students, faculty, and staff to think about how to resolve problems if they're wicked, or solve problems if they're more technical in nature. And I think what has been most successful is giving them a framework of questions that they can constantly turn back to when they're considering anything really, designing, interacting with folks. So those two things are design thinking. One is design thinking, so going through that process, but with a critical lens of asking the designer, usually the student or the faculty member, to think about who they are and why they're engaging in this work. So if a student is interested in starting a venture where they're creating clothing for folks who are physically disabled, my first question is why? What is your connection to this issue? What drives you? Also, do you share any of these identity markers? So always asking them where they're coming from in this issue. If they've never spoken to someone who is disabled, then I would tell them to start there. The other thing is a multicultural process that allows folks to speak across difference. And that difference could be any ism or variable that you can think of, but it also places it forces the person to really consider where they're coming from and what biases they're holding. So when it comes to technology, I think it's a very cognitive space. Like there's this thought that technology is neutral, it's objective, where in fact humans are making this technology, and there has been proof that it has had subjective implications. So I just think about like facial recognition for people of color. They were made predominantly by white people, and they did not think about the exposure and how people of color may not be able to use this technology. So making sure that you're also working collaboratively. So I find that design thinking paired with things that really force someone to think internally has been a very helpful tool to help iron out some ethical issues.
Great. Thank you, Samantha. I think we have time for maybe one more question or comment. It's probably going to go to whoever gets themselves off mute first.
I was just going to, it doesn't have to be the last comment. This is Paul Heidelberg again. I mean, I think the desire to be having meaningful engagement across disciplines around ethics and technology is something I hope we can encourage and enable. And I think frankly, it works both ways. So having taught classes that bring together peace and conflict studies students and engineering students, to solve problems, they both recognize the importance of the insights that their disciplines are bringing. You know, as engineers get beyond the confines of boundary diagrams as they're typically drawn for the problems they face, narrowly defined technical problems. And likewise, as peace and conflict studies students realize that kind of the way things work matters, and technology isn't just a black box. And so if they're really going to understand the complex interactions and effects that technological systems have on society, having a bit of an understanding of how things work is really important too. And so seems to me that on both sides, STEM and non-STEM, there's an important contribution to be made and important learning to happen. And I think this is where what really excites me is the change-making space, social innovation opportunities, and co-curricular programs that many of our institutions have can provide a context where that can really happen in a meaningful way, even more so than in a classroom setting.
Agreed, Paul. At my institution, the way we teach ethics is it's embedded in change-making and leadership. And so it's not its own separate course, but it's considered part of the skill set. Ethical decision-making is part of the skill set that you need to have to be a leader or a change maker. Vicki, I think you looked like you wanted to say something. Do you want to have our closing comment?
Oh, that's a big responsibility. But yeah, I could say something. Yeah. So I think what it comes down to for me is thinking about always connecting disciplines, not as disciplines with boundaries, but sort of humanistic inquiry. So whether we're talking about technology and STEM and engineering, or someone said they're studying marketing in Spanish, I'm a humanist by training. I came from an English lit background. So I find that the more we can kind of connect to these different so-called boundaried disciplines, and the more we can kind of work within and among them, the better we are at designing, the better we are as humans, the better we are at making sure we're all connecting effectively and creating together collaboration, right? That's in a nutshell.
Wow, I can get on that. That's a great. So we're stronger together. Any of our panelists have something they want to add that they didn't get to say during the regular session?
So I'll add that we attempted to make a Slack channel that was open to everybody with some additional resources if you're interested in learning more. So if you can't access the Slack channel, maybe just send your email in the group chat and I can make sure you get an invite. We're sharing things along the lines of, we were originally considering using tarot cards for tech as conversation starters in this session, but due to the time constraints, we had to cut that out. And we have another resource that's called How to Not Regret the Things That You Build for technologists, and a bunch of other resources if you're interested in learning more. So check that out.
Any questions perhaps for our panelists?
I guess, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Julia.
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to affirm Dr. George. She's the Associate Dean of our Engineering School, and she does a lot of great work, especially working with engineering abroad, so that engineers have a chance to understand more about the world and have a more global perspective, so that we can act more ethically. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Great.
Thank you very much.
That's great. Nancy, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to add, it was interesting that there weren't many people from outside the US. You know, and I find that really intriguing. I know Vicki is from Windsor, but you're right on the border there.
Paul's in Waterloo. Paul's in Waterloo.
Yeah. Well, no, I was thinking of in other sessions we've got people from other countries, and you know, I just think it is an interesting topic. You know, the links of special social media and national politics. So it's and I think in many ways it impacts the way people in other countries look at the issues that are local, you know, and I think that is something that people from a dominant country have some kind of responsibility to think about. Sorry, I just wanted to say that.
And ethics does have a cultural component.
That's right.
Our values. We look at things differently, and what is perfectly acceptable to one culture or one set of eyes is completely unacceptable somewhere else. And so there's this deeper need for all of us to understand ethics and our own values through cultural lenses. And I agree with Nancy that these conversations, not only do they need to be interdisciplinary, but also intercultural.
Yeah. Thank you.
You know, we really just hit on kind of the tip of the iceberg with this. And I'm just curious, as we think ahead to next year's exchange, and hopefully we'll be meeting in person, what would you like to see in programming around ethics at next year's exchange?
I don't know, the politics of ethics in innovation and change.
I think it would be cool if we could do like a case study example and then discuss a specific like story from the news or something, so that we have a like real life perspective.
Sure. Anything else?
Yeah, I'm thinking, I mean, in terms of thinking about classes or classrooms and how it could be from student perspective, could be from faculty or admin perspectives, just thinking about, you know, what are some of the ways we can engage these topics in classrooms, right? So I'm sure there are thousands of ways that people have tried, sort of what's worked best, what's worked the worst, and how can we potentially avoid pitfalls. Just sort of having that kind of discussion to be a bit creative with it and see what new ways we can think about.
Yeah.
Cultures, like I do really think that within the context of higher education, you know, there's just a very different culture in STEM dominated institutions and programs than there is in liberal arts institutions, which strikes me as those tend to be at the core of like the sweet spot for Ashoka and for change making. And so that's where, like, it does feel like I do a lot of translation work. And so more contexts or sessions or opportunities just to be bringing together these two cultural worlds in the, again, using, I think change making is a great vehicle for that, but just to acknowledge like that it doesn't, like it takes some effort and time, like any cross-cultural relationship, and growing fluency and comfort, because there is a lot of, if not confusion, sometimes hostility or resistance in many STEM programs as to why this needs to be a priority. And so I'm thinking even beyond ethics here, like just more generally. So, and again, I do really value the potential that Ashoka has and Changemaking has to be that platform and that connector or enabler for some of that work to happen at institutions like mine, anyway.
Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah. So we are now 8 minutes over time. I'm willing to stay and continue talking with anyone, but I know some of our panelists at least had something they wanted to go to at 6:30. So I want to give them permission to log off.
I'm going to jump into this next session as well. But I want to say thanks, Mandy, for facilitating. Great job.
Yeah.